Victoria Hale never begged. She commanded boardrooms, crushed competitors, and built an empire on ice-cold decisions. But tonight, slumped against a bathroom stall at her own company party, mascara streaking her perfectly composed face, she whispered words that would shatter everything. "Please don't leave me alone." Ethan Cole, the quiet single father she barely knew existed, stood frozen in the doorway. One choice: walk away and pretend he never saw the untouchable CEO broken and human, or step forward into a night that would crack open both their carefully constructed lives. He should have walked away. But stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey travels. Because what happened next? Neither of them saw it coming. The Grand Meridian Hotel glittered like a jewel box that December evening, every surface reflecting golden light that seemed designed to make ordinary people feel extraordinary, if only for a few hours. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, and the air hummed with that particular energy that comes when corporate ambition meets open bars and mandatory festivity. Ethan Cole stood near the back of the ballroom, nursing a glass of ginger ale, and wondering, not for the first time that evening, why he'd agreed to come at all. The answer, of course, sat in his wallet, a crayon drawing of a princess his daughter Lily had made that morning, complete with the words, "Daddy's the best," spelled in her careful 6-year-old handwriting. She'd been so excited when he told her about the fancy grown-up party, making him promise to remember every detail so she could draw it later. "You look like you're at a funeral, not a Christmas party." Sarah Chen from accounting appeared at his elbow, her smile warm despite the observation. She was one of the few people at Meridian Technologies who'd bothered to learn his name in the 8 months since he'd started. "Just taking it all in," Ethan replied, managing a small smile. "Not really my scene." "Not really anyone's scene, if we're being honest." Sarah gestured toward the crowd with her wine glass. "But the shrimp is decent, and watching the executives pretend to be human for one night a year has its entertainment value." Ethan's eyes drifted across the room, past clusters of coworkers laughing too loud at jokes that weren't that funny, past the DJ playing carefully curated upbeat but professional music, until they landed on the woman who was, in many ways, the reason they were all here. Victoria Hale stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, her silhouette sharp against the city lights beyond. Even from across the room, she radiated that particular kind of power that made people unconsciously straighten their spines when she passed. At 38, she'd built Meridian Technologies from a struggling startup into an industry leader, and she'd done it with a reputation for brilliance that was matched only by her reputation for being utterly, completely untouchable. "The Ice Queen looks particularly frosty tonight," Sarah murmured, following his gaze. "Third glass of champagne I've seen her take. That's unusual." It was unusual. In all the months Ethan had worked here, he'd never seen Victoria Hale as anything other than perfectly controlled. She moved through the office like a figure carved from marble, beautiful in an intimidating way, present but fundamentally separate from the mere mortals who executed her vision. "Maybe she's celebrating," Ethan offered, though something in Victoria's posture, the too straight spine, the way her fingers gripped the champagne flute, suggested otherwise. "Or medicating," Sarah said, not unkindly. "I heard her mother passed away last month. Not that she'd ever mention it. I only know because my friend in HR processed some paperwork." Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a recognition he didn't want to acknowledge. He knew about loss, about the weight that settled into your bones and never quite left. He knew about showing up to work every day and pretending you were fine when you were anything but. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "No one does. That's how she wants it." Sarah squeezed his arm. "I'm going to brave the dessert table. You should too, before the vultures from sales devour everything." As Sarah disappeared into the crowd, Ethan found himself unable to look away from Victoria. She was talking to Marcus Webb, the CFO, nodding at whatever he was saying, but there was something off about her movements. They were just a fraction too slow, her smile just a beat too delayed. The party swirled on around him. Someone cranked up the music. Laughter grew louder, fueled by premium liquor, and the relief of another fiscal year survived. Ethan made small talk with a few people from his department, accepted compliments on the data analysis system he'd designed, and kept one eye on his watch. Lily was having a sleepover at her grandmother's house. his late wife's mother, who'd become his lifeline in the 2 years since Sarah died, but he still didn't like being away too long. An hour passed, then another. Ethan was seriously considering slipping out early when he noticed the commotion near the windows. Victoria Hale was laughing, not the polite, controlled sound he'd heard in meetings, but real laughter that seemed to surprise even her. She was surrounded by senior executives, and someone had just refilled her glass. Her cheeks were flushed, her normally immaculate posture slightly askew. "Oh boy," someone nearby muttered. "Someone should probably cut her off." But no one moved. There was something almost fascinating about seeing Victoria Hale, the woman who'd once made a senior VP cry in a quarterly review, looking unsteady and human. Ethan felt uneasy. This wasn't entertainment. This was someone losing control in a room full of people who'd be gossiping about it for months. The party continued. Ethan helped himself to coffee from the bar, checked his phone for messages from his mother-in-law, just a photo of Lily in pajamas, grinning at the camera, and tried to decide if leaving now would be noticed. That's when he saw Victoria moving with that too careful precision of someone trying very hard to appear sober toward the hallway that led to the bathrooms. She didn't make it far before she stumbled. Ethan moved without thinking, closing the distance between them just as she caught herself against the wall. Up close, she looked smaller than she did in the boardroom, vulnerable. "Ms. Hale?" His voice was quiet, careful not to attract attention. "Are you all right?" She turned to look at him, and for a moment didn't seem to recognize him. Then her eyes focused, and he saw something flicker across her face. Embarrassment? Anger? Fear? "I'm fine." The words were crisp, automatic, but slightly slurred at the edges. "Just needed some air." "The bathroom is this way," Ethan said gently, offering his arm. "Let me help you." "I don't need—" She swayed slightly, and her hand shot out to grab his sleeve. "I don't need help." "I know," Ethan said, because he understood pride, understood the need to maintain control even when everything was falling apart. "But maybe just this once, you could accept it anyway." Something in his tone must have penetrated the alcohol and whatever else she was feeling, because Victoria nodded slightly and allowed him to guide her down the hallway. The bathroom lounge was blessedly empty, all thick carpet and soft lighting designed to make people feel pampered. Victoria immediately headed for one of the stalls, and Ethan heard the unmistakable sound of someone being sick. He should leave. This was his boss, the CEO of his company, and she would be mortified when she sobered up and realized he'd seen her like this. The smart thing, the professional thing, would be to slip out quietly and pretend this never happened. But then he heard her crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet, broken sounds that spoke of a grief too deep for words. The kind of crying that came from a place beyond embarrassment or pride, from that raw space where loss lived. Ethan had heard those sounds before. He'd made them himself, pressed into his pillow at 3 a.m. while Lily slept down the hall, when the weight of being both parents to a 4-year-old who kept asking when mommy was coming home became too much to bear in silence. He knocked gently on the stall door. "Ms. Hale?" "Victoria?" Silence. Then, "Go away." "I will," Ethan said, "but not yet. Not until I know you're okay." "I'm not," her voice cracked. "I'm not okay. I haven't been okay in a very long time, and I'm so tired of pretending." The words hung in the air between them, more honest than anything that had ever been said in any boardroom. Ethan slid down to sit on the floor, his back against the wall, giving her space but staying close enough to be present. "My wife died 2 years ago," he said quietly. "Lily, our daughter, was 4. Everyone kept telling me how strong I was, how well I was handling everything. And I'd smile and say thank you, and then I'd go home and stand in the kitchen trying to remember how to breathe." More silence. Then the sound of the lock clicking, and Victoria emerged from the stall. Her makeup was destroyed, her hair falling from its usually perfect arrangement, and she looked more real than he'd ever seen her. "I don't know you," she said, and it wasn't accusatory, just factual. "Ethan Cole, data systems, 3rd floor. I've worked here for 8 months. 8 months? Victoria laughed, a sound without humor. "I've probably walked past you 100 times and never noticed. I don't notice anyone anymore. Not really. She moved to the sink, splashing cold water on her face with hands that shook slightly. Ethan stood, maintaining a respectful distance, but ready to help if she needed it. My mother died 5 weeks ago, Victoria said, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to death. She was 72 and the only person in my life who ever... She stopped, pressing her fingers against her eyes. I didn't even take time off. I went to the funeral on a Saturday and was back in the office Monday morning. Everyone said how professional I was. How strong. Strength and stupidity look a lot alike sometimes, Ethan said gently. Victoria turned to look at him, really look at him, and Ethan saw the exact moment when she made the connection. You're the one who redesigned the data architecture. The efficiency report cited your work. Guilty. They said you were brilliant but quiet, that you kept to yourself. She tilted her head. Why? Because I'm holding on by my fingernails most days, and small talk with coworkers who want to know how I'm doing feels like lying, Ethan said, surprised by his own honesty. It's easier to be invisible. I know that feeling. Victoria gripped the edge of the sink. God, I know that feeling. She swayed again, and this time Ethan did step forward, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. When's the last time you ate? Breakfast. Maybe. I don't remember. And you've had too much to drink, obviously. She closed her eyes. This is mortifying. It's human, Ethan corrected. And for what it's worth, everyone out there is too drunk or too focused on their own dramas to have noticed much. You noticed. I noticed you were in trouble. There's a difference. He guided her to the small settee in the lounge area. Can I get you some water, some crackers from the bar? You should go back to the party, Victoria said, but there was no force behind the words. Or go home. I'm sure you have better things to do than babysit your drunk boss. Actually, my 6-year-old is at her grandmother's, and the alternative is going home to an empty house and watching terrible TV until I fall asleep on the couch, Ethan said. So this is honestly an improvement. The corner of Victoria's mouth twitched, almost a smile. You're strange. I'm aware. He left her there and made his way back to the party, which had grown louder and messier in his absence. He grabbed bottles of water, some crackers and cheese from the appetizer table, and slipped back to the bathroom lounge without anyone seeming to notice or care. Victoria was exactly where he'd left her, staring at nothing with eyes that held decades of exhaustion. Water, Ethan said, pressing a bottle into her hands. And food. Try to eat something. She obeyed mechanically, taking small bites of cheese and crackers, while Ethan sat in the chair across from her, giving her space but staying close enough to help if she needed it. Why are you being kind to me? Victoria asked after a few minutes. I don't even know your name, knew your name. I mean, I do now, but before tonight, I was just another face in a company full of people working for me. I'm not a good person, Ethan. I've fired people. I've made decisions that prioritized profit over ethics. I've sacrificed relationships and burned bridges and built an empire on being someone people fear rather than respect. And yet here you are, human and hurting like everyone else, Ethan said. Funny how that works. You don't know what I've done. No, Ethan agreed, but I know what grief does to people. How it makes you do things that don't make sense, build walls that keep everyone out because letting anyone in means risking more loss. I know what it's like to wake up every day and put on a mask because the alternative is falling apart, and you can't afford to fall apart because there are people depending on you. Victoria's eyes filled with tears again. I haven't cried in front of anyone in 20 years, not even when my father died, not even when my marriage fell apart, and now I can't seem to stop. Then don't, Ethan said simply. Not tonight. Tonight you don't have to be Victoria Hale, CEO. You can just be Victoria, a person who's hurting, a person who's allowed to hurt. And just like that, the dam broke completely. Victoria wept and Ethan sat with her, offering tissues and water and presents. Nothing more, nothing less. Time became fluid. Ethan wasn't sure if 15 minutes passed or 45. The sounds of the party grew distant, then faded entirely as people began to leave. Eventually, Victoria's tears slowed, then stopped. I need to go home, she said, her voice hoarse. Do you have a car? A driver? I drove myself, which was stupid, obviously. Obviously, Ethan agreed. Can I call you a car or... He hesitated. I could drive you. My car's in the garage. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. You don't have to do this. I know. This isn't your responsibility. I know that too. Then why? Ethan thought about Lily, about the kind of man he wanted to be for her, the kind of person who helped when help was needed, who showed up when showing up mattered, who understood that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply not leave someone alone in their darkest moment. Because someone did it for me once, he said. After Sarah died, I had a neighbor who just showed up, brought meals, watched Lily so I could shower or sleep, never asked for anything, never made a big deal of it, just helped because I needed help. And I remember thinking that if I ever had the chance to be that person for someone else, I would be. Victoria nodded slowly. Okay. Okay. Drive me home. Please. Getting Victoria to his car without attracting attention was easier than expected. Most people had already left, and those who remained were too drunk or distracted to care. Ethan's Honda Civic was decidedly unglamorous compared to what Victoria probably drove, but she folded herself into the passenger seat without comment. The city was dressed for the holidays, every street corner and storefront sparkling with lights. It should have been beautiful, but Ethan knew how those lights could feel like mockery when you were grieving, how forced cheer could make loneliness feel even more profound. Where am I taking you? He asked. Victoria rattled off an address in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, and Ethan input it into his phone's GPS. 30 minutes across town, maybe less at this time of night. They drove in silence for the first few miles, the only sound the soft voice of the GPS and the occasional swish of tires on wet pavement. Then Victoria spoke. Tell me about your daughter. Ethan glanced at her, surprised. Lily? Is that her name? Lily? Yeah, she's 6, obsessed with dinosaurs and art, usually at the same time. Her current project is drawing what she calls historically accurate princess dinosaurs. He smiled despite himself. I have no idea what that means, but she's very serious about it. She sounds wonderful. She is. She's everything. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Some days I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm a single dad who works full-time and still can't figure out how to get her hair into a proper ponytail. I burn dinner half the time and forget to sign permission slips, but she's happy. At least I think she's happy. I hope she's happy. Does she remember her mother? Some. More feelings than specifics, I think. She knows Sarah loved her. That's what matters. Victoria was quiet for another block, then, I never wanted children. Everyone always assumed I was just too focused on my career, and I let them think that because it was easier than explaining that I was terrified I'd become my mother. Cold, distant, more concerned with appearances than with actually loving anyone. Did you become your mother? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. She leaned her head against the window. She was brilliant, you know, an attorney, made partner before she was 30. But she was never warm. Never the kind of mother who hugged you or told you she loved you. She showed love through expectations, through pushing you to be better, achieve more, never settle for less than perfection. That sounds exhausting. It was. And then I grew up and did the exact same thing to myself, pushed and pushed until I built this empire, and for what? So I could stand in a penthouse apartment alone every night, surrounded by expensive things that mean nothing? The GPS directed them off the highway and onto tree-lined streets where houses grew larger and more imposing. Ethan had delivered Lily to birthday parties in neighborhoods like this, had felt out of place among the luxury vehicles and landscaped perfection. That's what my mother said to me, Victoria continued, in the hospital, near the end. She was so small by then, the cancer had eaten away everything that made her formidable, and she looked at me and said, I'm so sorry I taught you to build walls instead of bridges. I told her it was fine, that I was fine, that I'd made my choices, and she said, her voice broke. She said, You're not fine, sweetheart. You're alone, and I'm so sorry I showed you how to be alone. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. What could anyone say to that kind of deathbed revelation? The last thing she told me was to find someone who made me feel safe enough to be weak, Victoria whispered. And I laughed. because I'd spent my entire life becoming strong, building armor, making myself untouchable. The idea of being weak, of being vulnerable. It was terrifying. It is terrifying, Ethan said. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the bravest thing we can do is let ourselves be vulnerable anyway. They pulled up to a high-rise that screamed money and exclusivity. A doorman stood at attention under the awning, and Ethan suddenly felt very aware of his off-the-rack suit and his car that was held together with hope and regular oil changes. "This is me," Victoria said unnecessarily, but she didn't move to get out. Instead, she sat there, staring up at the building like it was a prison instead of a luxury residence. "I don't want to go in there," she said quietly. "It's so empty, so quiet. And tonight, after everything, I don't think I can face that quiet." Ethan understood. He'd had nights like that too, after Sarah died. Nights when his own house felt like a mausoleum, when silence pressed in from all sides until he thought he might lose his mind. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Victoria turned to look at him, and in the dim light from the dashboard, she looked young and lost. "I have no idea. I can't remember the last time I did something just because I wanted to, not because it was strategic or necessary or good for business." An idea formed in Ethan's mind. Probably a terrible idea, almost certainly inappropriate. But looking at Victoria's face, at the desperate loneliness there, he couldn't help himself. "My house is 20 minutes from here," he said slowly. "It's small, messy, covered in Lily's artwork and Legos I keep forgetting to pick up. But it's not empty, and it's not quiet in the way you mean. If you need somewhere to just be for a while, somewhere you don't have to be anyone in particular, you could come there, just until you feel ready to face the quiet." It was absolutely inappropriate. She was his boss. This could be seen as 1,000 different things, none of them good. But Ethan had learned something in the 2 years since Sarah's death. Sometimes the right thing and the appropriate thing weren't the same, and you had to choose which mattered more. Victoria stared at him for a long moment. Then, "That's the kindest, strangest offer anyone has ever made me. I specialize in kind and strange. Your house. My house. With the Legos and the dinosaur princess art. So much art. The refrigerator can barely hold it all." Victoria laughed, and it sounded surprised, like she'd forgotten she could make that sound. "Okay. Okay? Take me to your house, Ethan Cole. Show me what a home is supposed to feel like." And just like that, Ethan put the car in drive and headed toward a future neither of them could have predicted, carrying them both away from the lives they'd carefully constructed and toward something entirely unknown. The drive to Ethan's house felt longer than it was, weighted with the strangeness of what they were doing. Victoria sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, watching the city transform from gleaming high-rises to modest residential neighborhoods where Christmas lights blinked from porches and inflatable snowmen swayed in front yards. The contrast to her sterile penthouse couldn't have been more stark. Ethan's mind raced with second thoughts. What was he doing bringing his boss, the CEO of his company, to his house at 11 o'clock at night? This could go wrong in so many ways. He could lose his job. She could think he had ulterior motives. Tomorrow, in the sober light of day, this entire evening would probably seem like a fever dream to both of them. But then he glanced at Victoria and saw her pressing her forehead against the window like a child, her breath fogging the glass, and he knew he'd made the right choice. She needed this, whatever this was. "That one's nice," Victoria murmured, pointing to a house with synchronized light display. "My mother would have hated it. She always said holiday decorations were gauche." "Lily made me promise we'd put up lights this year," Ethan said. "Last year I couldn't face it. Too many memories of doing it with Sarah. But Lily drew me approximately 40 pictures of our house covered in lights, so I caved. They're probably crooked. I'm not great with electrical things." "I've never decorated for the holidays," Victoria said. "Not once. Not even when I was married." "Never?" "Richard, my ex-husband, said it was childish, and I agreed because I was already trying so hard to be the kind of wife he wanted. Sophisticated, refined, not the kind of person who got excited about tinsel." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out I wasn't the kind of wife he wanted anyway. He left me for his yoga instructor. A cliché so perfect I couldn't even be properly angry about it." Ethan turned onto his street, where modest homes sat close together, separated by chain-link fences and shared driveways. His house was in the middle of the block, a small ranch-style place with faded blue siding and a yard that desperately needed landscaping work he never had time for. "This is it," he said, pulling into the driveway. The Christmas lights Lily had insisted on were indeed crooked, blinking in an uncoordinated pattern that suggested he'd given up halfway through installation. "I warned you about the mess." Victoria looked at the house for a long moment. "It looks loved." Something about the way she said it made Ethan's chest tight. When was the last time anyone had described his house that way? Most people saw the peeling paint and the overgrown bushes and the toys scattered in the yard, but Victoria saw something different. He unlocked the front door and flipped on the lights, immediately wincing at what they revealed. Lily's backpack was thrown in the corner where she'd dropped it after school. Her shoes, bright pink with dinosaurs on them, sat in the middle of the hallway. The living room coffee table was covered with crayons and construction paper and what looked like the remains of their dinner from 2 nights ago. "I wasn't expecting company," Ethan said apologetically, moving quickly to gather up the worst of the mess. "Don't," Victoria said quietly. "Please don't clean up for me. This is—" She turned in a slow circle, taking in the drawings taped to every wall, the blanket fort that had been abandoned but not dismantled in the corner, the bookshelf overflowing with picture books and chapter books and reference books about dinosaurs. "This is what a home looks like." Ethan stopped moving, watching as Victoria walked slowly through his living room like she was in a museum. She paused at the wall of photographs, mostly of Lily, but a few of Sarah, too, because he'd promised himself he wouldn't erase her from their home, wouldn't let Lily forget the woman who'd loved her first. "She was beautiful," Victoria said, studying a photo of Sarah laughing, Lily as a baby in her arms. "She was," Ethan agreed. "She was also stubborn and terrible at cooking and obsessed with true crime podcasts. She'd stay up until 2 in the morning listening to stories about serial killers, then wake me up because she was too scared to sleep." Victoria smiled. "You loved her." "So much it hurt sometimes," Ethan said honestly, "even before she died. That's what no one tells you about real love. It's terrifying, giving someone that much power over your happiness, your whole world. And then when they're gone, the world doesn't make sense anymore," Victoria finished softly. "Yeah." They stood there in silence, 2 people who understood loss in a way that couldn't be explained to anyone who hadn't lived it. Then Victoria swayed slightly, and Ethan remembered she was still drunk and probably exhausted. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the couch. "Let me get you some water. And coffee, if you want it." "Coffee sounds good." Victoria sank onto the couch, which was old and worn but comfortable. She pulled one of Lily's stuffed dinosaurs into her lap without seeming to realize she'd done it. "This is a Triceratops?" "That's Trixie," Ethan called from the kitchen. "Lily's favorite. Sleeps with her every night." The kitchen was small but functional, and blessedly cleaner than the living room because his mother-in-law had been over yesterday and couldn't help herself from tidying. Ethan started the coffee maker and filled a glass with water, then stood at the counter for a moment, trying to process what was happening. Victoria Hale was in his living room. The woman who commanded million-dollar deals was cuddling his daughter's stuffed Triceratops. The CEO who'd never decorated for the holidays was sitting in his messy house, looking more at peace than he'd ever seen her at the office. The world had officially stopped making sense. When he returned to the living room, Victoria was examining one of Lily's drawings, a princess with a crown and what appeared to be scales and a tail. "Princess Rexy," Ethan explained, setting the water and coffee on the table. According to Lily, she ruled the Cretaceous period with kindness and very strict bedtime rules. "The historical accuracy is questionable," Victoria said seriously, "but the artistic vision is sound. I'll let her know you approve." Victoria took a sip of coffee, and some color began returning to her face. She still looked exhausted, and her makeup was ruined, and her hair had completely given up any pretense of professional styling, but she also looked more human than Ethan had ever seen her. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said after a moment. "Sure." "Why did you help me tonight? And please don't say it's because I'm your boss or because you felt obligated. I want the real reason." Ethan sat down in the armchair across from her, considering his answer carefully. Because I saw someone who was hurting and alone, and I remembered what that felt like. And because, he paused, because I've spent 2 years being invisible, playing it safe, not making waves, just trying to survive each day without falling apart. And tonight, I saw someone who needed help, and for the first time in a long time, I could actually do something that mattered. Does that make sense? More than you know, Victoria said quietly. She set down her coffee and leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. I've built this entire life on being needed professionally, but never personally, on being respected, but never known. And tonight, in the bathroom at that party, I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone saw me as anything other than a title. Victoria Hale, CEO. Victoria Hale, the Ice Queen. Victoria Hale, the woman who's all business and no heart. That's not who you are, Ethan said. Isn't it? What do you actually know about me? Ethan thought about that. I know you're brilliant. Everyone in the company knows that. I know you're demanding but fair. You've never asked anyone to work harder than you work yourself. I know you remember details. Last month you referenced a presentation I'd given in a meeting 3 months prior, quoted my exact statistics. Most executives wouldn't have paid that much attention. Victoria looked surprised. You noticed that? Of course I noticed. It's rare for anyone in upper management to actually listen to what the lower-level employees say. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I also know you're lonely. That part's newer information, but I think it's maybe the truest thing about you right now. I'm pathetic, Victoria said, but there was no self-pity in it, just statement of fact. You're human, Ethan corrected. There's a difference. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Victoria noticed the bookshelf again. You have a lot of books. Sarah was an elementary school teacher. She believed in books the way some people believe in religion. Ethan smiled at the memory. She'd come home from book fairs with bags full of purchases we couldn't afford, but she'd be so excited about sharing them with her students that I could never be mad about it. What did she teach? 2nd grade, she loved that age, old enough to read independently, but young enough to still believe in magic. His voice caught slightly. She was going to read to Lily's class this year, had the whole thing planned out, and then life decided to be cruel, Victoria finished. Yeah. Victoria stood and walked to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines. I can't remember the last time I read for pleasure. Everything is business journals and market reports and emails. I've forgotten how to do anything that doesn't have a productive purpose. Sarah used to say that was the whole point of life, doing things that served no purpose except joy. Ethan joined her at the bookshelf. She'd spend hours in the garden, even though she killed everything she planted. She'd try new recipes that always failed spectacularly. She'd dance in the kitchen while cooking dinner, completely off rhythm and not caring at all. She sounds wonderful. She was. She was also infuriating and messy and left wet towels on the bathroom floor and could never remember where she'd put her keys. Ethan pulled a book from the shelf, a worn copy of children's poetry. But she was alive in a way I've never been. I've always been careful, measured, safe, and she was just vibrant. Victoria took the book from him, opening it to a random page. My mother gave me one book when I was a child, a biography of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I was 7. I wanted fairy tales, and she gave me legal precedents. That's heartbreaking. That's preparation, Victoria said, but her voice was soft. At least, that's what she'd say. She was preparing me for a world that wouldn't be kind to women who wanted power. And she was right, the world wasn't kind. But I wonder now if maybe the preparation cost me something important. She sat back down on the couch, still holding the poetry book. Ethan watched her flip through the pages, saw something in her face shift and soften. When my mother was dying, Victoria said slowly, I'd sit by her hospital bed and try to think of things to say, stories to tell her, memories to share, and I realized we didn't have any, not real ones. No stories about Christmas mornings or bedtime rituals or inside jokes, just performance reviews of my life, schools attended, grades achieved, promotions earned. That's all we ever talked about. I'm sorry, Ethan said, and meant it. The worst part was that she was sorry too. I could see it in her eyes, all the regret for what we'd never been to each other. But by then it was too late to fix it, Too late to learn how to be a mother and daughter instead of mentor and protege. Victoria closed the book carefully. She told me I should find someone who could teach me how to live instead of just how to achieve. And I told her I didn't know how. Ethan moved to sit on the other end of the couch, maintaining respectful distance but offering presence. It's not too late, to learn. I'm 38 years old. I've spent my entire adult life becoming someone who doesn't know how to be vulnerable or soft, or in any of the things that make people capable of real connection. How do you unlearn that? The same way you learn anything else, Ethan said, one small step at a time, one choice at a time. Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, and Ethan saw something shift in her expression. Is that what you did? After Sarah died? I didn't have a choice. Lily needed me to figure it out. Ethan thought back to those early days, the overwhelming terror of being solely responsible for this small human who was grieving her mother and looking to him for stability he didn't feel. The first few months were survival mode, just getting through each day, making sure she was fed and safe and loved, even when I felt like I was dying inside. How did you do it? Badly, at first, Ethan admitted. I forgot to pack her lunch twice in 1 week. I sent her to school in mismatched shoes because I wasn't paying attention. I broke down crying in the grocery store because Sarah always knew which brand of peanut butter Lily liked, and I couldn't remember. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. But you kept going. What else could I do? She needed me. And somewhere along the way, I realized that taking care of her was the only thing keeping me together. That having to show up for her every day, having to be present and functional, was actually saving my life. Do you ever resent it? Having to be strong when you wanted to fall apart? Ethan considered that. Sometimes. In the beginning, yeah. I'd see other people getting to grieve however they wanted, taking time off work, falling apart in socially acceptable ways. And I'd think about how unfair it was that I had to keep it together because I had a 4-year-old who needed me to be okay. But now, he paused. Now I'm grateful, because Lily gave me a reason to keep living when I couldn't find one for myself. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the tick of the kitchen clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Victoria had stopped crying, but her eyes remained wet, reflective. I don't have that, she said quietly. I don't have anyone who needs me to be okay. If I fell apart tomorrow, the company would replace me within a week. Life would go on without me, and no one would really care. That's not true. Isn't it? Victoria met his eyes. Name one person who would actually miss me. Not Victoria Hale, the CEO, but me, the person behind the title. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was wrong, but he couldn't. Because the truth was, Victoria had built her life to be self-sufficient, to the point of isolation. She'd succeeded in becoming untouchable, and the price was that no one could touch her even when she needed it most. Then maybe it's time to change that, Ethan said finally. Maybe it's time to let people in. I don't know how. Start small. Start here. He gestured around the living room. You're already doing it. You're sitting in my messy house, drinking coffee, being honest about how you feel. That's a start. Victoria laughed, but it wasn't unkind. This is the strangest night of my life. Mine too, Ethan agreed, but strange doesn't mean wrong. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, tell me more about Lily. Not the impressive stuff, the real stuff. What's she like when no one's watching? And so Ethan did. He told her about how Lily insisted on wearing her dinosaur costume to the grocery store at least once a week. How she'd started a petition in her first-grade class to make lunch break longer, complete with carefully drawn charts showing why 20 minutes wasn't enough time for proper socializing. How she talked to her stuffed animals like they were real and had complex storylines involving them that she'd been developing for months. Last week, Ethan said, warming to the subject, she informed me very seriously that she couldn't possibly eat broccoli because she was a Tyrannosaurus Rex and they only ate meat. I told her that was fine, but princesses had to eat their vegetables. She disappeared into her room for 30 minutes and came back with a drawing of a carnivorous princess who had special meat-eating teeth. Victoria laughed, a real, genuine laugh that transformed her face. She sounds like you. Everyone says she's like Sarah. She has her smile, her fearlessness. But the logical problem-solving? The creative workarounds? That's all you. Victoria tilted her head. I've seen you in meetings. The way you think through problems, find solutions no one else sees. Lily got that from you. Ethan had never thought of it that way. He'd been so focused on preserving Sarah's memory and Lily, on making sure she knew her mother, that he'd never considered what parts of himself she might carry. Sarah was the brave one, he said. I'm just the one who survived. Bravery isn't about not being afraid, Victoria said softly. It's about being terrified and showing up anyway. You do that every day for your daughter. That's brave. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easier than Ethan would have thought possible. Victoria asked questions about his work, his life, his dreams for Lily's future. Ethan found himself sharing things he hadn't told anyone. His fear that he was failing as a father, his guilt about sometimes resenting the weight of single parenthood, his terror that Lily would grow up and blame him for not being enough. And Victoria shared too. She talked about the pressure of being a woman in tech, of fighting for every inch of respect in rooms full of men who assumed she'd slept her way to the top. She talked about her marriage to Richard, how she'd molded herself into what he wanted, only to discover he'd never really wanted her at all. She talked about her mother's death and the strange grief of mourning someone you'd never really known. I keep thinking I should feel more, Victoria admitted. Everyone expects this outpouring of sorrow, and I feel empty, relieved even, which makes me a terrible person. It makes you honest, Ethan said. You can't grieve someone you never had a real relationship with the same way you'd grieve someone you love deeply. That doesn't make you terrible. It makes you human. I keep saying that I'm human, like I need to remind myself. Victoria rubbed her eyes, and Ethan noticed she was finally starting to look sober, though exhaustion had taken alcohol's place. I've spent so long being something other than human, something harder, colder, more efficient. And now I'm sitting here in your living room, and I can't remember why I thought that was necessary. Because the world told you it was, Ethan said. Because the world punishes women who are soft and rewards women who are steel. You did what you had to do to survive. But at what cost? Victoria looked around the room again, at all the evidence of life being lived messily and fully. I have money, power, success, and I'd trade it all right now for one person who knew me well enough to miss me if I was gone. The clock in the kitchen chimed midnight, and Victoria startled slightly, as if remembering where she was. I should go, she said, but she didn't move. I've already taken up too much of your night. You haven't, Ethan said truthfully, but I could call you a car if you're ready. Victoria stood, swaying slightly, exhaustion this time, not alcohol. She steadied herself on the arm of the couch, and Ethan saw her look one more time around his living room, her gaze lingering on the photos, the drawings, all the evidence of a life built on love rather than achievement. Thank you, she said quietly. For tonight, for not leaving me alone, for bringing me here, and letting me see what a real home looks like. Any time, Ethan said, and meant it. But before he could reach for his phone to call a car, Victoria suddenly sat back down, her face pale. Actually, she said, I don't feel well. She made it to the bathroom just in time. Ethan waited in the hallway, listening to the sounds of her being sick again and feeling helpless. When the sound stopped, he knocked gently. Victoria, can I get you anything? Just water, came the weak reply, and maybe a place to die of embarrassment. Ethan got the water and a cold washcloth, then sat on the floor outside the bathroom door. The embarrassment thing isn't happening, but the water's here when you're ready. A few minutes later, the door opened and Victoria emerged, looking absolutely wrecked but slightly more steady. I can't go home like this, she said, gesturing to herself. I can barely stand up, and I'll just be sick again in the car. Ethan made a decision. Probably another terrible one, but at this point he was committed to the evening's insanity. Guest room, he said. It's actually Lily's playroom, but there's a pull-out couch. You can stay here tonight, sleep it off, and figure out the rest in the morning. I couldn't. You can and you will, Ethan said firmly. You're in no condition to go anywhere, and I'm not sending you home alone like this. I'll feel terrible. You'll feel terrible, and frankly, I don't think either of us has the energy for terrible right now. Victoria looked like she wanted to argue, but couldn't quite summon the strength. Okay, she said finally. Thank you. Ethan showed her to the playroom, which was exactly as chaotic as promised. Legos everywhere, dress-up costumes spilling out of a trunk, more dinosaur drawings taped to the walls. But the pull-out couch was clean, and he quickly made it up with fresh sheets while Victoria stood in the doorway looking overwhelmed. There are clothes in the closet, he said. Oversized t-shirts, sweatpants, Sarah's stuff that I kept for when I need something comfortable. Take whatever you want. Bathroom's across the hall, and if you need anything in the night, I'm just down at the end of the hallway. Ethan, Victoria said, and her voice cracked. I don't deserve this kindness. Everyone deserves kindness, Ethan said simply, especially when they're at their lowest. Now get some sleep. We'll figure out tomorrow when tomorrow comes. He left her there and retreated to his own room, suddenly exhausted down to his bones. What a night. What an absolutely surreal, impossible night. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Ethan wondered what he'd set in motion. Tomorrow, Victoria would probably regret everything. She'd be mortified at her vulnerability, angry at herself for showing weakness. She might even fire him to eliminate the evidence of her humanity, but somehow he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Because for a few hours tonight, he'd felt useful in a way he hadn't since Sarah died. He'd helped someone who needed help. He'd been present for another human being who was drowning in loneliness and grief. And maybe, just maybe, he'd reminded himself that he was more than just a surviving widower and a struggling single father. He was still capable of compassion, still capable of showing up for someone else. Down the hall, he heard the guest room door close quietly. He imagined Victoria in Sarah's old clothes, surrounded by Lily's toys, trying to make sense of a night that had veered so far from her controlled, carefully managed life. Tomorrow would be complicated. Tomorrow they'd have to face what this evening had been and what it meant. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan felt like maybe he'd done something that actually mattered. Ethan woke to the sound of movement in his kitchen. For a disoriented moment, he thought maybe he'd dreamed the entire previous night, the party, Victoria breaking down, the drive to his house, all of it some elaborate stress-induced hallucination. But then he heard the distinct clink of a mug being set down on his counter, and he knew it had all been real. He checked his phone. 6:45 in the morning, early, even for him, especially for someone who'd been as drunk as Victoria had been just hours ago. Ethan pulled on sweatpants and a t-shirt, running a hand through his hair in a futile attempt to look less like he'd been hit by a truck. Then he steeled himself and walked toward the kitchen. Victoria stood at his counter, still wearing Sarah's old college sweatshirt and a pair of yoga pants that were too short for her long legs. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face scrubbed clean of last night's ruined makeup. She looked younger without the armor of perfectly applied cosmetics and tailored business suits. Vulnerable in a way that made Ethan's chest ache. She was making coffee, moving through his kitchen with the careful precision of someone who was nursing a spectacular hangover but refusing to acknowledge it. "Morning," Ethan said softly, not wanting to startle her. Victoria turned, and he saw the moment she registered his presence. The flash of something that might have been embarrassment or fear or both. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I woke up and couldn't fall back asleep, and I didn't want to just lie there, so I thought, I hope you don't mind that I made coffee." "I don't mind." Ethan moved into the kitchen, maintaining a respectful distance. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck, run over by a train, and then pecked to death by very aggressive birds," Victoria said, and despite everything, there was a hint of humor in her voice. "But I've been worse. Have you?" "No, this is actually a new low." She poured coffee into 2 mugs, handed one to Ethan. "I don't usually... Last night wasn't... I'm not someone who loses control like that." "I know," Ethan said gently. "You were grieving and exhausted and human. It happens." Victoria wrapped both hands around her mug, staring down into the dark liquid like it held answers to questions she couldn't articulate. "I keep replaying everything I said, everything I told you, and I'm trying to figure out if I should be mortified or relieved." "What are you leaning toward?" "Both, simultaneously. It's very uncomfortable." She looked up at him, and her eyes were clearer than they'd been last night, sharp with intelligence and something that might have been fear. "I told you things I've never told anyone, about my mother, my marriage, how lonely I am, and now I have to figure out what that means. Ethan took a sip of his coffee, buying himself time to choose his words carefully. It means you trusted me with the truth. That's all. It doesn't have to mean anything more than that unless you want it to. But you're my employee. I'm your boss. There's a power dynamic here that makes this, she gestured vaguely between them, complicated. It is complicated, Ethan agreed, but it's also 6:45 on a Sunday morning, and we're two people drinking coffee in a kitchen, not CEO and data analyst, just Victoria and Ethan. Can we be that for a little while longer before we figure out the complicated parts? Something in Victoria's face softened. I'd like that. They stood in silence for a moment, drinking coffee and not quite looking at each other. Through the kitchen window, Ethan could see his neighbor's house, already lit up with activity. Normal Sunday morning things happening in normal Sunday morning houses. Meanwhile, he was standing in his kitchen with his boss wearing his dead wife's clothes, trying to navigate a situation he had absolutely no reference point for. I looked at Lily's drawings while I was making coffee, Victoria said eventually, the ones on your refrigerator. She's really talented. She is. Gets it from Sarah. I can barely draw stick figures. Ethan smiled, thinking about his daughter. She's with her grandmother until this afternoon. Sunday tradition. They make pancakes and watch old movies and generally spoil each other rotten. That sounds nice, having that kind of support. Sarah's mom has been a lifesaver, literally. I don't think I would have survived the first year without her. Ethan set down his mug. She lost her daughter but still showed up for me and Lily. Still shows up every week. I don't take that for granted. Victoria was quiet for a moment. My mother-in-law hated me. Thought I'd trapped Richard into marriage, even though he proposed to me. When we divorced, she threw a party. Actually threw a party to celebrate being rid of me. That's awful. That's honesty, Victoria said. I wasn't a good wife. I was married to my work more than I was married to Richard. He wanted someone who'd be home for dinner and host parties and care about his golf handicap. And I wanted... She paused. I don't know what I wanted. Partnership, maybe. Someone who understood that my career mattered as much as his did. But Richard was old school. He wanted a wife who enhanced his life without having too much of her own. So you divorced. He divorced me. Found someone who fit his vision better. Someone softer, more accommodating. Victoria's voice was matter-of-fact, but Ethan heard the hurt underneath. I signed the papers and threw myself into work even harder. Proved to everyone, including myself, that I didn't need anyone. That I was fine alone. And were you? Fine? Victoria met his eyes. What do you think? Before Ethan could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from his mother-in-law with a photo of Lily covered in pancake batter, grinning wildly at the camera. Below it, she insisted on helping. Your kitchen will never be the same. He showed Victoria the photo, and her face transformed. The careful control slipped away, replaced by something genuine and warm. She's beautiful, Victoria said softly. She has your eyes. Everyone says she has Sarah's smile. She can have both. Victoria handed back the phone. You talk about Sarah a lot. Present tense sometimes, like she's still here. Ethan hadn't realized he did that. I guess in some ways she is. In Lily. In this house. In all the little habits and routines we built together that I can't quite let go of. Do you want to let go? The question hit harder than Ethan expected. Did he want to let go? He'd been so focused on surviving, on keeping Sarah's memory alive for Lily, that he'd never actually considered what moving forward might look like. I don't know, he admitted. Sometimes I think I'm ready. I'll be doing something completely ordinary, grocery shopping, putting Lily to bed, and I'll realize I haven't thought about Sarah in hours. And I feel guilty, like I'm betraying her by learning how to be okay without her. That's not betrayal, Victoria said quietly. That's healing. Is it? Because it feels like forgetting. You're not forgetting, you're just... Victoria struggled for words. You're making room for new things alongside the old things. That's different. They moved to the kitchen table, sitting across from each other in the same chairs where countless breakfasts had been eaten, homework had been completed, life had been lived in all its mundane glory. The morning sun slanted through the window, catching dust motes in the air and painting everything in shades of gold. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said after a moment. "And you can tell me it's none of my business, because it's absolutely none of my business, but I'm going to ask anyway." "Okay. How do you do it?" Victoria leaned forward, her eyes intense. "How do you balance everything? Grief, being a single parent, working full-time, and still remain kind? Still show up for a drunk boss you barely know and bring her into your home and treat her with compassion? Where does that come from?" The question landed like a physical blow. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest, all the carefully maintained composure he'd built over 2 years suddenly threatening to shatter. "I'm not—" His voice came out rough. "I'm not as put together as you think I am." "I'm not saying you're put together. I'm asking how you keep choosing kindness when the world has been so unkind to you." Ethan stood abruptly, turning away from her because he couldn't have this conversation while looking into her eyes. He moved to the window, staring out at his overgrown yard where Lily's bike lay on its side, exactly where she'd dropped it Friday afternoon. "You want to know the truth?" he said finally. "I don't feel kind. I feel angry, furious sometimes, at the universe for taking Sarah, at her for leaving me alone, at every couple I see holding hands or every family I see with both parents at Lily's school events. I'm so angry I could scream." "But you don't," Victoria said softly. "Scream?" "No. Because what good would it do? Sarah's still gone. I'm still alone. Lily still needs me to be functional. So I get up every morning and I make breakfast and I pack lunches and I go to work and I come home and I help with homework and I read bedtime stories. And I do it all while feeling like I'm drowning, like any second I'm going to lose my grip and fall apart completely." "Ethan, you asked how I stay kind." He turned back to face her, and he didn't try to hide the tears in his eyes. "I stay kind because the alternative is becoming bitter. And if I become bitter, if I let the anger win, then I lose myself completely. And Lily deserves better than a father who's just going through the motions. She deserves someone who can still find joy, even when joy feels impossible." Victoria stood slowly, moving toward him with the careful movements of someone approaching a wounded animal. "You're remarkable. I'm surviving. There's a difference." "No," Victoria said firmly. "You're doing more than surviving. You're choosing, every single day, to show up fully, to be present, to make your daughter's life full of love and art and dinosaurs and possibility. That's not just survival, that's courage. It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like I don't have any other choice. But you do have choices. You could check out emotionally. You could do the bare minimum. You could let grief consume you and let Lily grow up in the shadow of that grief. But you're not doing that. You're fighting every day to give her a childhood filled with more than just loss." Ethan wiped at his eyes, frustrated with himself for falling apart. "I'm sorry. You came here dealing with your own grief, and I'm—" "Stop," Victoria interrupted. "Stop apologizing for being human, for having feelings, for letting yourself be vulnerable." She took another step closer. "Do you know what I saw when I walked around your house this morning while you were sleeping? I saw love. In every drawing on the walls, every scattered toy, every photograph, I saw evidence of a life being lived fully despite loss. And it made me realize something." "What?" "That I've been doing it all wrong." Victoria's voice cracked. "I've spent my whole life building walls, maintaining control, never letting anyone see weakness, and I thought that made me strong. But you let yourself be broken, and somehow that makes you stronger than I've ever been. That's not true." "It is true. You asked me last night if I'd ever had anyone who would miss me if I was gone, and the answer is no, because I've never let anyone close enough to miss me. I've mistaken isolation for independence and loneliness for strength." She looked around the kitchen. "But this, what you have here, this is real strength. Building a life that matters, connecting with people, letting yourself love even when you know how much it can hurt to lose what you love." They stood facing each other in the morning light, two people stripped of all pretense, all armor, all the careful roles they played in their professional lives. Just two humans trying to figure out how to keep living when life had knocked them sideways. "I don't know what I'm doing," Ethan admitted. With any of it. Parenting, grieving, living. I'm making it up as I go and hoping I don't screw up Lily too badly in the process. But you're trying. That's more than I can say. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself. I haven't really tried at anything personal in years. I've achieved professionally, but I've completely failed at being a person who has relationships, connections, anything that makes life worth living. It's not too late, Ethan said, to try, to change. I'm 38 years old and I don't have a single friend I could call at 3 a.m. I don't have anyone who knows how I take my coffee or what movies make me cry or what I dream about when I let myself dream. I've spent so long being Victoria Hale, CEO, that I've forgotten how to be just Victoria. Then maybe it's time to remember. Victoria laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. I don't even know where to start. Start here, Ethan said. Start with being honest about what you want, what you need, what you're afraid of. What I want? Victoria looked at him like he'd asked her to solve an impossible equation. She stopped, struggling. I want to feel something other than numb. I want to wake up in the morning and have something to look forward to besides another day of meetings and strategy sessions and proving myself over and over again. Her voice broke completely. I want what you have, a life that matters beyond quarterly earnings and market share. What you need, Ethan prompted gently. I need to figure out how to be a person again, how to connect, how to let people in without it feeling like I'm losing control. Victoria met his eyes. I need someone to teach me how to do that, because I honestly don't know how. And what you're afraid of? Victoria was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm afraid it's too late. That I've been alone so long I've forgotten how to be anything else. That I'm fundamentally broken in some way that makes me incapable of real connection. I'm afraid that I'll try and fail, and that failure will confirm every terrible thing I've ever believed about myself. The vulnerability in her words made Ethan's heart ache. He understood that fear intimately, the terror that you were too damaged, too changed by loss, too fundamentally altered to ever be whole again. You're not broken, he said firmly. You're hurting. There's a difference. How do you know? Because broken people don't recognize their own pain. They don't ask questions like you're asking. They don't seek connection even when it terrifies them. Ethan took a step toward her. You showed up here last night, Victoria. Vulnerable and honest and brave enough to let me see you at your lowest. That's not broken. That's human. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to do this. How to be this person who admits to needing help. Neither did I. I had to learn. And I'm still learning. Ethan gestured to the chairs. Sit. Let me make you breakfast, and we'll figure out the rest one step at a time. You're going to make me breakfast? Unless you're opposed to slightly burnt pancakes and probably too crispy bacon. Those are my specialties. That sounds... Victoria's voice caught. That sounds perfect. As Ethan moved around the kitchen, pulling out ingredients and firing up the stove, Victoria sat at the table and watched him with an expression he couldn't quite read. He felt self-conscious under her gaze, aware that he wasn't much of a cook, that his kitchen was cluttered with evidence of his perpetual state of barely keeping it together. But Victoria didn't seem to notice the mess. She just watched as he cracked eggs and mixed batter, her face soft with something that looked almost like wonder. Sarah taught you to cook? She asked. Sarah tried to teach me to cook. There's a difference. Ethan poured batter onto the griddle. She was patient about it, but I think we both knew I was a lost cause. These days, Lily and I survive mostly on pasta, grilled cheese, and an alarming amount of takeout. My mother never cooked. We had a service that delivered meals, pre-portioned, nutritionally balanced, absolutely devoid of joy. Victoria smiled slightly. I remember going to friends' houses and being amazed that people actually made food from scratch. It seemed like magic. It's not magic, it's just... Ethan flipped a pancake, pleased when it didn't immediately disintegrate. It's caring enough to put in the effort to make something with your hands that nourishes someone you love. I've never done that for anyone. Never? Never. When I was married, we either ordered in or went out. I can make coffee and toast. That's the extent of my domestic skills. She paused. That sounds pathetic, doesn't it? It sounds like you had different priorities, different skills. Ethan plated the pancakes and bacon, setting a plate in front of her. You built a company from nothing. That takes a different kind of nurturing. Victoria looked down at the breakfast in front of her, imperfect but made with care. Richard used to say I was cold, incapable of the small kindnesses that make relationships work. And I'd tell him that was ridiculous, that I was perfectly capable of kindness. But looking back, I'm not sure I was. I'd buy him expensive gifts but forget his birthday. I'd make sure we had the best tables at the best restaurants but never ask about his day. I was performing the role of wife without actually being a partner. Do you regret it, the divorce? No, we were wrong for each other from the start. But I regret that I never learned how to be someone who could make a relationship work. I watched my parents' cold marriage and swore I'd be different, and then I turned around and did exactly the same thing. Ethan sat down across from her with his own plate. You're being pretty hard on yourself. Am I? Or am I just being honest? Victoria took a bite of pancake and something in her face shifted. This is good. Don't sound so surprised. I am surprised. I thought... She stopped, laughing a little. I don't know what I thought. That someone who's surviving on takeout and grief wouldn't be capable of making something this simple and good. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Ethan found himself watching Victoria, noticing small things he'd never seen in the office. The way she closed her eyes briefly when she took the first sip of coffee, as if savoring it. The slight curve of her mouth when something pleased her. The way her fingers drummed absently against the table, a nervous habit she probably didn't realize she had. What? Victoria asked, catching him staring. Nothing, just, you're different here. Softer. Is that bad? No, it's honest. Ethan set down his fork. At the office, you're this untouchable figure. Everyone's a little afraid of you, but here, you're just a person. Someone who makes coffee in borrowed clothes and eats burnt pancakes and admits to being lonely. Which version do you prefer? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning that Ethan wasn't sure either of them was ready to unpack. I prefer honesty, he said finally. Whatever form that takes. Victoria nodded slowly. I've been thinking about something you said last night, about how you felt invisible at work. How you kept to yourself because it was easier than pretending to be okay. Yeah? I do that too, just in a different way. She pushed her plate aside, leaning forward. I make myself hypervisible professionally while being completely invisible personally. I'm the CEO everyone knows, but no one actually knows. Does that make sense? Complete sense. And it's exhausting, maintaining this image of perfection, of having everything under control, when inside I'm... She gestured vaguely. Whatever this is. Human, Ethan supplied. Inside, you're human. Inside, I'm a mess, Victoria corrected. I'm lonely and scared and completely lost. I have everything I thought I wanted, and it's not enough. It's never been enough. But I don't know how to want something different. I don't even know what something different would look like. Ethan thought about that, about how easy it was to get trapped in a life that looked good on paper but felt hollow in practice. How success could be just another form of survival mode, keeping you busy enough to avoid examining whether you were actually happy. What made you happy? He asked. Before all of this? Before you became CEO? Before your marriage fell apart? Before you built walls to keep everyone out? What made you happy? Victoria stared at him, and Ethan saw her struggling to remember. That was so long ago, I'm not sure I can... She stopped, pressing her fingers against her temples. In college, I used to paint. Nothing serious, just for myself. I'd spend hours in the studio, losing track of time completely. And I felt free, like I was creating something that mattered just because it mattered to me, not because it would impress anyone or advance my career. When's the last time you painted? 20 years ago? Maybe more. Victoria's voice was soft with something that might have been grief. I told myself I didn't have time, that it was frivolous, that I needed to focus on serious things, my education, my career, building something substantial. And eventually I stopped even thinking about it, boxed up all my supplies and forgot they existed. But you still remember it made you happy. I remember it made me feel like myself, like I was enough, just as I was, without having to achieve or prove or perform. She looked at Ethan. When's the last time you did something just because it made you happy? Not for Lily, not out of obligation, but just for you? Ethan had to think about that. I honestly don't remember. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Victoria said with a sad smile. Two people who've forgotten how to do anything except survive. Maybe that's okay, Ethan said slowly, an idea forming. Maybe surviving is all we're supposed to do right now, and maybe finding moments of something more, like this breakfast, this conversation. Maybe that's enough for now. Victoria looked around the kitchen, at the morning light streaming through windows that needed cleaning, at the clutter and chaos and evidence of life being lived imperfectly. I think this might be the most honest conversation I've had in years, she said quietly. Possibly ever, and it's with someone I've worked with for 8 months and barely noticed until last night. That's weird? I was going to say telling, but weird works too. She stood carrying her plate to the sink. I should probably go, figure out how to get home, deal with whatever aftermath Sunday brings. Do you want to go? The question stopped Victoria mid-motion. She set the plate down carefully, then turned to face him. No, she admitted. I don't want to go back to my empty apartment and my empty life and pretend last night didn't happen. But I also don't know what the alternative is. The alternative is staying a little longer, Ethan said, having another cup of coffee, talking more. Or not talking, just being, without expectation or agenda or worry about what it means. Is that allowed? Can I just stay? Victoria, you're not a prisoner. You can do whatever you want. She laughed, but it sounded almost sad. That's the problem. I don't know what I want. I've spent so long doing what I should do, what's expected, what makes strategic sense, that the concept of just wanting something for no other reason than I want it feels completely foreign. Ethan refilled both their coffee mugs, then led her into the living room. They sat on the couch, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough that it felt companionable rather than distant. Tell me something true, Victoria said after a moment. Something you've never told anyone else. Ethan didn't have to think long. Sometimes I resent Lily. Not all the time. Not even often. But sometimes, when I'm exhausted and overwhelmed and the weight of being everything to her feels like too much, I resent that I don't get to fall apart, that I have to keep it together for her sake. And then I feel guilty for feeling that way, which makes everything worse. Victoria nodded slowly. Thank you for trusting me with that. Your turn. Something true. She was quiet for so long that Ethan thought maybe he'd pushed too far. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm terrified that this is all I'll ever be. That I've become so hardened by building this career that I'm incapable of real softness, real love, real connection, and that I'll die alone having achieved everything professionally and nothing that actually matters. The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw and painful. You're here, Ethan said gently. Right now, being vulnerable, being real, that's not nothing. It feels like nothing. One morning of honesty doesn't undo 20 years of walls. No, but it's a start. He turned to face her more fully. You asked me how I do it, how I keep choosing kindness when life has been unkind. Want to know the real answer? Yes. I choose it because the alternative is giving up, becoming bitter and closed off and letting loss define everything I am. And I refuse to do that to Lily. I refuse to let her grow up thinking the world is cruel and people are disposable and love isn't worth the risk. Ethan's voice was fierce. So I choose kindness, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because that's the only way I know to fight back against everything that's tried to break me. Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I want that. I want to be someone who chooses kindness, who fights back instead of just existing. Then choose it, Ethan said simply. Starting now, starting small. One choice at a time. How? However feels right to you. He gestured around the living room. You could start by being kind to yourself, by acknowledging that you're doing the best you can with what you have, by giving yourself permission to be imperfect and human and still worthy of connection. Victoria was quiet, processing that. Then, softly, Will you help me? Teach me how to... She struggled for words. How to be the person I want to be instead of the person I've become. The request caught Ethan off guard. I'm barely keeping my own life together. I'm not qualified to de... You're the most qualified person I know, Victoria interrupted. You've been through loss and come out the other side still capable of compassion, still capable of showing up for a stranger who needed help. If anyone can teach me how to be human again, it's you. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. The weight of what she was asking felt enormous, and also strangely natural, like maybe this was what last night had been leading toward all along. I don't have answers, he warned. Just questions and mistakes, and a lot of fumbling around trying to figure out how to keep living. That's more than I have. Victoria met his eyes. Please, Ethan, I know I have no right to ask this. I know it's complicated and potentially inappropriate and crosses about 1,000 professional boundaries. But I'm asking anyway. Help me figure out how to be more than just successful. Help me learn how to actually live. And looking at her face, at the desperate hope there, Ethan knew he couldn't say no. Knew he wouldn't say no, because maybe helping Victoria find her way back to herself was also a way of helping himself do the same. Okay, he said quietly. We'll figure it out together, one small choice at a time. Victoria left an hour later, after Ethan called her a car and made sure she had water and aspirin for the headache that would inevitably get worse before it got better. They exchanged phone numbers with an awkwardness that felt oddly teenage, both of them uncertain what came next, but knowing something had fundamentally shifted between them. Thank you, Victoria said at the door, still wearing Sarah's clothes with her ruined dress from the party folded carefully under her arm. For everything. For not leaving me alone. Any time, Ethan said, and meant it. He watched the car pull away, then turned back to his empty house and tried to make sense of what had just happened. In the span of 12 hours, his carefully compartmentalized life had cracked wide open. His boss had seen him at his most vulnerable. He'd seen her the same way. And somehow, impossibly, they'd promised to help each other learn how to actually live instead of just survive. The following Monday arrived with the cold inevitability of deadlines and responsibilities. Ethan dropped Lily at school, her backpack covered in new dinosaur stickers courtesy of her grandmother's weekend spoiling, and drove to work with a knot of anxiety in his stomach. Would Victoria pretend nothing happened? Would she regret everything she'd said? Would there be an awkward conversation in which they both agreed to forget the entire night? But when he arrived at his desk, there was a note waiting. Not an email. An actual handwritten note on expensive cardstock that could only have come from Victoria's office. Thank you for your kindness. I meant what I said. Small choices. Starting now. V. That was all. But it was enough to make Ethan's chest feel tight with something he couldn't quite name. The days that followed were strange. Victoria didn't summon him to her office or acknowledge what had happened in any public way. But small things changed. She started leaving her office door open more often. She said good morning to people in the hallways by name, people she'd previously walked past without seeming to notice existed. She sat in on team meetings not to criticize but to listen, actually listen, to what people were saying. The company noticed. Sarah from accounting cornered Ethan in the break room Wednesday afternoon, her eyes wide with curiosity. What happened at the party? She asked without preamble. Victoria's been different since. Less terrifying, Ethan supplied. I was going to say distant, but yeah, less terrifying works too. Sarah studied him with interest. You left early. Did you see something? Just people getting drunk and making questionable decisions, Ethan said, which was technically true. You know how those things go. If Sarah suspected there was more to the story, she was kind enough not to push. But Ethan noticed the way people looked at him now, like they were trying to figure out if he knew something they didn't. The truth was, he didn't know anything. He was navigating blind, waiting to see what Victoria would do with this strange new connection they'd forged. Thursday afternoon, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Then he realized it wasn't unknown. It was Victoria. I did something small today. Went to lunch with the team from marketing instead of eating alone at my desk. It was uncomfortable but good. Thank you for the push. Ethan smiled, typing back. That's great. See? Small choices. Your turn. What small choice did you make today? He thought about it. What had he done today that was outside his usual survival routine? Then it hit him. I signed up to volunteer at Lily's school next month, reading to the first graders. Haven't done anything like that since Sarah died. Feels terrifying and necessary. Terrifying and necessary. That's exactly it. The texts became regular after that. Not constant, they both had full lives and demanding jobs, but consistent. Victoria would share small victories, having coffee with a colleague just to talk, not because she needed something. Admitting to her executive team when she didn't have an answer instead of pretending omniscience. Taking a full lunch break to walk in the park near the office. And Ethan would share his own small steps, finally cleaning out Sarah's closet, keeping a few pieces for memory but donating the rest. Accepting a dinner invitation from Lily's friend's parents instead of making excuses. Letting himself cry during a sad movie without feeling weak about it. They were tiny changes, barely noticeable from the outside, but they felt monumental. 3 weeks after the party, Victoria asked to have lunch with him. Not at a restaurant where they might be seen by colleagues and spark rumors, but at a quiet cafe across town where the likelihood of running into anyone from Meridian Technologies was minimal. Ethan arrived first, choosing a table in the back corner. When Victoria walked in, he almost didn't recognize her. She was wearing jeans, actual jeans, and a simple sweater. Her hair was down instead of pulled back in its usual severe style. She looked younger, softer, more like the woman who'd sat at his kitchen table and admitted to being terrified of her own loneliness. "Is this weird?" she asked, sitting down across from him. "This feels weird." "It's definitely weird," Ethan agreed. "But weird seems to be our thing." Victoria laughed, and Ethan realized it was becoming easier to make her laugh. The sound came more naturally now, less surprising to both of them. They ordered sandwiches and coffee, making small talk about work and weather until the food arrived. Then Victoria set down her coffee and looked at him seriously. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I've been seeing a therapist." Ethan felt a surge of pride. "That's huge, Victoria." "I know, I fought against it for years, thought it was self-indulgent or weak or... I don't know, but after that night at your house, after everything we talked about, I realized I needed help processing things. My mother's death, my divorce, this entire life I've built that looks successful but feels empty." She paused. "So I found someone. Started going twice a week, and it's the hardest thing I've ever done." "Harder than building a company?" "So much harder, because building a company meant putting on armor and fighting. Therapy means taking off the armor and being vulnerable. And I'm terrible at being vulnerable." "You're getting better at it," Ethan said gently. "Every text you send, every small choice you make, every moment you let yourself be honest instead of perfect, that's vulnerability." Victoria nodded, but he could see the emotion building behind her eyes. "My therapist asked me yesterday what I wanted my life to look like 5 years from now. And I realized I couldn't answer. I've spent so long focused on quarterly goals and market expansion that I've never actually thought about what I want personally. What would make me happy beyond professional success?" "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I want to matter to people, not as a CEO or a business leader, but as a person. I want relationships that go deeper than networking. I want someone to call on a random Tuesday just to say hello. I want..." Her voice cracked. "I want what you have with Lily. That unconditional love. That sense of being needed, not for what you can do, but for who you are." Ethan's heart ached for her. "Those things are possible, Victoria, but they take time and risk. And being willing to let people see you without the armor." "I know, that's what terrifies me." She met his eyes. "What if I try and I'm still not enough? What if I let people in and they see who I really am and decide I'm not worth knowing?" "Then they're idiots," Ethan said flatly, "because the person I've gotten to know over these past few weeks, the one who texts me about walking in the park and having lunch with colleagues and facing her fears, that person is absolutely worth knowing." Victoria blinked hard, fighting tears. "You barely know me. I know the parts that matter, the parts you usually hide." He leaned forward. "I know you're brave even when you're terrified. I know you're trying to change even when change feels impossible. I know you care more than you let anyone see. That's not nothing, Victoria." They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the cafe washing over them. Then Victoria spoke again, her voice quiet. My therapist also asked me about you. Me? She wanted to know about the person who'd helped me that night, who'd brought me home and made me breakfast and promised to help me learn how to live differently. Victoria smiled slightly. I told her about you, about Lily, about how you've rebuilt your life after loss. And she said something interesting. What? She said that sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we'd expect, that sometimes connection happens in the most unlikely places, with the most unlikely people, and that those connections can be the most transformative because they come without preconception or expectation. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. The weight of what Victoria was implying hung between them, too significant to acknowledge directly, but impossible to ignore. I'm not trying to make this weird, Victoria continued quickly. This isn't me developing inappropriate feelings for you or crossing boundaries or any of that. You're married. You were married. You're grieving. I'm your boss. There are about 1,000 reasons why this, she gestured between them. Whatever this friendship is, needs to stay exactly that. A friendship. Okay, Ethan said slowly. But I also need you to know that you've changed my life. In 3 weeks, you've helped me see possibilities I didn't know existed. You've shown me that it's possible to be soft and strong simultaneously. That vulnerability isn't weakness. That there's a whole way of living I've been missing out on. She took a shaky breath. So thank you for that night, for these texts, for this lunch, for seeing me when I felt invisible. You were never invisible, Ethan said. Just hidden. There's a difference. Over the following weeks, their friendship deepened in ways that surprised both of them. They'd meet for lunch every Thursday, a standing appointment that neither acknowledged as such but both protected fiercely in their schedules. They'd text throughout the week, sharing small victories and setbacks, offering each other encouragement and understanding. Victoria started making bigger changes. She hired a deputy CEO to handle some of the day-to-day operations, freeing up time for strategic thinking and, more importantly, for life. She started painting again, setting up a small studio in her apartment and spending Sunday mornings creating art that no one would ever see, but that made her feel like herself. Ethan made changes too. He started dating, nothing serious, just coffee with a woman from Lily's school who'd been asking for months. It didn't work out, but the fact that he'd tried felt significant. He started exercising again, early morning runs that helped clear his head and made him feel more present in his body. He even started writing, journaling about his grief and his fears and his hopes for the future in a way that felt cathartic. 2 months after the party, Victoria made an announcement at a company-wide meeting that shocked everyone. She was implementing new policies around work-life balance. No emails after 6 p.m. unless it was a genuine emergency, mandatory vacation days that people actually had to take, subsidized therapy and counseling for all employees. We've built a successful company, she told the assembled staff, her voice clear and strong. But we've done it at the cost of our humanity. I'm guilty of this more than anyone. I've prioritized productivity over people, profits over well-being, and I'm done with that. Starting now, we're going to build a company culture that values you as whole human beings, not just as workers. The speech was met with stunned silence, then tentative applause that grew into something genuine. Ethan watched from the back of the room, proud of her courage, knowing how much that admission had cost her. Afterward, he found her in her office, staring out the window at the city skyline. That was brave, he said from the doorway. Victoria turned and he saw tears on her cheeks. That was terrifying. I basically admitted to everyone that I've been doing it wrong, that I've been so focused on success that I forgot about people. You did more than that. You showed them it's possible to change, to admit mistakes and do better. Ethan moved into the office. That's leadership, real leadership. I couldn't have done it without you, Victoria said quietly. Without these past 2 months. Without learning that there's more to life than quarterly earnings and market dominance. You did it yourself. I just reminded you it was possible. Victoria shook her head. No, you showed me what it looks like. A life built on love instead of achievement, on connection instead of control, on being present instead of just productive. She wiped at her eyes. I want that, Ethan. I want a life that feels full, not just successful. You're building it, Ethan said. Every day, every small choice, you're building it. That weekend, something unexpected happened. Ethan's mother-in-law called Saturday morning, her voice apologetic. I hate to do this, but I've come down with the flu. I'm not going to be able to take Lily today. I don't want to get her sick. Ethan had plans. A rare Saturday to himself while Lily was supposed to be with her grandmother, time he'd planned to use for errands and maybe actually cleaning the house. But he could hear the guilt in his mother-in-law's voice and rushed to reassure her. It's fine, really. Feel better. We'll reschedule. He hung up and looked at Lily, who was already in her dinosaur costume, ready for a day of adventure with Grandma. Change of plans, sweetheart. Grandma's sick, so it's you and me today. Lily's face fell for a moment, then brightened. Can we do something fun? What did you have in mind? The Science Museum. They have a new dinosaur exhibit. Ethan checked his phone. The museum was 45 minutes away, would be crowded on a Saturday, and would completely destroy his plans for a productive day. He was about to suggest something easier when he remembered Victoria's words about small choices, about building a life instead of just surviving it. The Science Museum it is, he said, and Lily's delighted squeal made the decision worth it. An hour later, as they were walking into the museum, Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Question. What does someone do on a Saturday when they've spent their whole life working weekends? Asking for a friend who's currently sitting in her apartment having a minor existential crisis. Ethan smiled, typing back. Funny you should ask. I'm at the Science Museum with Lily for a dinosaur exhibit. Want to join us? He sent it before he could overthink it, then immediately wondered if he'd overstepped. They'd met for lunch, yes, but always just the two of them. Introducing Victoria to Lily felt like crossing some invisible line, mixing the parts of his life he'd carefully kept separate. But then his phone buzzed again. I'd love that. If you're sure. If it's not weird. It's definitely weird, but when has that stopped us? I'll text you the address. 30 minutes later, Ethan spotted Victoria near the museum entrance. She was wearing jeans again, her hair in a ponytail, looking nervous and young, and nothing like the intimidating CEO who commanded boardrooms. Lily noticed her too. Daddy, who's that lady? Why does she look scared? That's my friend Victoria, Ethan said, taking Lily's hand and walking toward her. She's never been to a museum before, so she might need us to show her around. Never? Lily's eyes went wide. That's so sad. Victoria heard this and laughed, the nervousness on her face easing slightly. It is sad. I've been missing out on a lot of things. Think you can help me catch up? Lily studied Victoria with the serious assessment only a 6-year-old could manage. Then she held out her hand. I'm Lily. I'm 6 3/4. I like dinosaurs and art and my daddy. Do you like any of those things? Victoria shook Lily's hand solemnly. I'm Victoria. I'm 38 and I like all of those things, especially your daddy. He's been very kind to me. He's the best daddy in the whole world, Lily declared matter-of-factly. Then she grabbed Victoria's other hand. Come on, the T-Rex exhibit is this way. And just like that, they were off. Lily chattering excitedly about the differences between various dinosaur species, while Victoria listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made Lily glow with the pleasure of being taken seriously. Ethan followed behind them, watching Victoria kneel down to Lily's eye level to examine a fossilized egg, watching her laugh at Lily's elaborate story about Princess Rexy and her adventures in the Cretaceous period, watching her relax into a version of herself he'd never seen before. They spent 3 hours at the museum. Lily dragged them from exhibit to exhibit, an enthusiastic tour guide who narrated everything with confidence that sometimes exceeded her actual knowledge. Victoria was patient and engaged, never once checking her phone or seeming bored. At one point, while Lily was absorbed in an interactive display, Victoria turned to Ethan with tears in her eyes. Thank you for this, she said quietly, for including me, for letting me be part of this. She likes you, Ethan said, watching his daughter manipulate a model dinosaur skeleton with intense concentration. That's not easy to earn. Lily's a tough critic. She's wonderful. You've done such a good job with her. I've done my best. Some days that's great. Some days that's barely adequate. Victoria touched his arm briefly. Can I tell you something? Watching you with her, the way you're patient when she asks the same question 5 times, The way you celebrate her enthusiasm even when you're probably exhausted. The way you make her feel safe and loved and important. It's making me realize what I missed by not having children. What I gave up when I decided my career was more important than anything else. It's not too late, Ethan said. If that's something you want. I'm 38, single. I wouldn't even know how to begin. The same way you've been approaching everything else. One small choice at a time. They were interrupted by Lily returning, tugging on Victoria's hand. Can you come see the meteor exhibit? It has the one that killed all the dinosaurs. Victoria let herself be led away, and Ethan followed, watching his daughter and his boss, his friend, bond over extinction events and cosmic catastrophes with a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. After the museum, they grabbed pizza at Lily's favorite place, a cheap chain restaurant that Victoria had probably never set foot in before. Lily sat between them in the booth, swinging her legs and describing in elaborate detail all the things she'd learned that day. You're really smart, Lily said to Victoria at one point, tomato sauce on her chin. Do you work with my daddy? I do, Victoria said. Your daddy is very good at his job. I know. He's good at everything. Lily took another bite of pizza. Are you his friend? I am. Good. He needs more friends. He gets lonely sometimes when I'm at Grandma's. Lily said this with the casual certainty of a child who noticed everything and filtered nothing. Ethan felt his face heat, but Victoria just nodded seriously. I get lonely too, but I'm working on making more friends. Your daddy is helping me with that. That's good, Lily said approvingly. Then, without any transition, do you want to come to my birthday party next month? We're having it at the park and there's going to be a dinosaur pinata. Victoria looked at Ethan, clearly unsure how to respond. He gave a small nod, leaving the choice to her. I would love to come to your birthday party, Victoria said, if your daddy says it's okay. It's more than okay, Ethan said quietly. As they walked to their cars afterward, Lily skipping ahead in the parking lot, Victoria grabbed Ethan's arm. That was the best day I've had in years, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Maybe ever. Just being normal, being with people who care about each other, being part of something real instead of something strategic. You're welcome any time, Ethan said. Really? Lily clearly adores you, and honestly, it was nice having another adult along. Someone who actually wanted to read every single plaque instead of rushing through. Victoria laughed. I couldn't help it. I've missed so much. I want to absorb everything. They stood there in the parking lot, the sun setting behind them, and Ethan felt something shift between them. Something that went beyond friendship, but that neither of them was ready to name or examine too closely. I should go, Victoria said finally. Thank you, Ethan. For today. For everything. Thank you for coming. It meant a lot. To both of us. As he drove home with Lily chattering in the back seat about Victoria and dinosaurs and how much fun they'd had, Ethan realized something important. He was happy. Not just content or surviving or making it through, actually happy. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like he was living instead of just existing. And somehow, impossibly, helping Victoria rediscover her own humanity had helped him rediscover his. The next few weeks blurred together in a pattern that felt both strange and natural. Thursday lunches continued, weekend outings became more frequent, the zoo, a children's theater production, a local farmer's market where Lily insisted on buying vegetables she'd never eat. Victoria integrated herself into their lives gradually, never pushing, always respectful of boundaries, but undeniably present in a way that changed everything. She started sending Lily postcards throughout the week, little notes about things they'd seen together or encouraging messages about school. Lily started drawing pictures specifically for Victoria, elaborate scenes featuring dinosaurs and princesses that Victoria displayed in her office with pride that baffled her executive team. Is that a child's drawing? Marcus Webb had asked once, staring at a particularly colorful T-Rex wearing a crown. It's art, Victoria had said firmly, from a very talented artist. At work, the changes Victoria had implemented were transforming the company culture. People seemed happier, more engaged. Productivity hadn't dropped as the old guard had predicted. If anything, it had increased. Employees who felt valued and rested did better work. Who knew? Ethan watched it all with quiet pride, knowing he'd played a small part in Victoria's evolution, but also knowing she'd done the hard work herself. She was braver than she gave herself credit for. 3 months after the party, Victoria's therapist apparently asked her to do something that terrified her: host a dinner party. Not a corporate networking event, but an actual dinner party with people she wanted to know better as friends, not contacts. Victoria called Ethan in a panic. "I don't know how to do this. I've never had people over just for fun. What do I cook? What do we talk about? What if it's awkward and everyone hates it?" "Breathe," Ethan said. "It's just dinner. Order in if you're worried about cooking. Invite people you actually like, and trust that conversation will happen naturally when you're with people you care about." "Will you come? You and Lily? I know it's weird, but I need at least one person there who won't judge me if I completely mess this up." "We'll be there," Ethan promised. The dinner party was small. Just Ethan and Lily, Sarah from accounting and her husband, and 2 of Victoria's college friends she'd reconnected with after years of losing touch. Victoria was visibly nervous as she welcomed everyone into her penthouse apartment, but Lily broke the ice immediately by demanding a tour and declaring everything fancy but nice. The evening was far from perfect. Victoria had ordered too much food, and the wine she'd chosen was apparently all wrong for what they were eating, at least according to Sarah's husband, who knew about such things. But it was also warm and genuine, full of laughter and easy conversation, and the kind of connection Victoria had been starving for without realizing it. At one point, Ethan found Victoria in the kitchen, taking a moment to herself. She was smiling, but tears streaked her cheeks. "Happy tears," she said before he could ask. I have people in my home. Real people who I actually like, who seem to like me back. And we're eating pizza that cost way too much, and drinking wine that apparently pairs terribly with it, and it's perfect. How is it perfect?" "Because it's real," Ethan said simply. "No performance, no strategy, just people being together because they want to be." Victoria hugged him then, quick and impulsive, and Ethan hugged her back, ignoring the way his heart raced at the contact. When they pulled apart, Victoria's expression had shifted to something more serious. "I need to tell you something." "Okay." "I've been thinking about stepping back from the CEO role. Not leaving the company, but transitioning to more of an advisory position. Letting someone else handle the daily operations while I focus on long-term vision and strategy." She took a breath. "My therapist thinks it's a good idea, a way to create space for the life I'm trying to build. But it's terrifying. Because it feels like giving up the thing that defined you." "Exactly. Without being CEO, who am I? What's my purpose?" Ethan gestured toward the living room where laughter echoed. "You're Victoria, a person with friends and interests and a life outside of work. That's your purpose. Living fully, connecting authentically, being more than just your job title." "When did you get so wise?" "When I stopped having any choice but to figure out how to keep living," Ethan said. "Loss has a way of clarifying what actually matters." They stood there in the kitchen, the sounds of the party continuing without them, and Ethan felt the air between them shift again, charged with possibility neither was quite ready to acknowledge. "I should get back to my guests," Victoria said softly, but she didn't move. "You should," Ethan agreed, equally still. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken things, until Lily's voice calling for her daddy broke the spell. They returned to the party, the moment passed but not forgotten, settling into a corner of both their minds where complicated feelings lived. As Ethan drove home that night, Lily asleep in the back seat, he realized something that both thrilled and terrified him. He was falling for Victoria Hale. Not the untouchable CEO, but the real woman beneath. The one who tried too hard at dinner parties and cried happy tears and sent postcards to 6-year-olds. The one who was brave enough to completely remake her life because she wanted to actually live it. And that was a problem. Because she was still his boss. He was still grieving his wife. There were boundaries and complications, and 1,000 very good reasons why this couldn't be anything more than the deep friendship it already was. But his heart, apparently, didn't care about any of that. His heart had made its own small choice, and now he had to figure out what to do about it. The realization sat heavy in Ethan's chest for weeks. He went through the motions of his daily life, work, parenting, the Thursday lunches with Victoria that had become sacred, while wrestling with feelings he'd thought were dead and buried with Sarah. He hadn't expected to feel this way again, hadn't thought he was capable of it, and the timing couldn't have been worse. Victoria was in the middle of her transition, negotiating the delicate politics of stepping back from the CEO role while maintaining influence and relevance within the company she'd built. She was stressed, vulnerable, relying on Ethan's friendship as an anchor while she navigated yet another massive life change. The last thing she needed was him complicating everything with feelings she might not reciprocate, so Ethan did what he'd gotten very good at over the past 2 years. He buried it, smiled and listened and showed up as the friend she needed, while his heart did complicated things every time she laughed or touched his arm or looked at him with that expression that suggested maybe, possibly, she felt something too. It was Lily who forced the issue, as children often do, with the devastating honesty only a 6-year-old could deliver. They were making dinner together one evening, Ethan chopping vegetables while Lily set the table with intense concentration, when she asked, "Daddy, do you like Victoria?" Ethan's knife slipped, nearly catching his finger. "Of course I like her. She's my friend." "No, I mean, do you like her? Like how Prince Charming likes Cinderella?" "Lily, because I think you do. You smile different when she texts you, and you wear your nice shirts on Thursdays now, and you get that look." "What look?" "The happy but scared look. Like when we got our puppy and you were excited but also worried we'd mess it up." Lily arranged napkins with careful precision. "I don't think we'd mess up Victoria, though. She's already part of our family." Ethan set down the knife, his hand suddenly unsteady. "It's more complicated than that, sweetheart." "Why? Because she's your boss?" Lily looked up at him with Sarah's eyes, seeing straight through every defense he'd constructed. "Or because you feel bad about Mommy?" The question hit like a physical blow. Ethan sank into a chair, pulling Lily onto his lap, even though she was getting too big for it. "Both," he admitted quietly. "Victoria is my boss, which makes everything weird. And Mommy, I loved your mother so much, Lily. I still love her. And feeling things for someone else feels like I'm betraying her memory." Lily was quiet for a moment, then, "I don't think Mommy would be mad. I think she'd want you to be happy." "How do you know that?" "Because that's what love is. Wanting people to be happy even when you can't be there." Lily said this with the simple certainty of someone who understood love more purely than most adults ever would. "And Victoria makes you happy. She makes me happy too. So maybe Mommy would like her." Ethan held his daughter close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, and felt something unlock in his chest. Permission he hadn't known he was waiting for, delivered by the person whose opinion mattered most. "You're pretty smart for 6 3/4, he said, his voice rough. "I know," Lily said matter-of-factly. "So are you going to tell her?" "I don't know. It might not be the right time. She's going through a lot right now." "Daddy," Lily said with exaggerated patience, "you always say the right time is when you're brave enough to try, so be brave." Out of the mouths of children, Ethan thought, come truths we spend our whole lives trying to learn. That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan sat on his back porch and let himself think about Sarah. Really think about her, not just the sanitized memories he usually allowed himself. He thought about their fights and her flaws and the way she'd sometimes drive him crazy. But he also thought about her fierce love of life, her insistence on being present, her belief that fear was a terrible reason not to try. What would Sarah say if she could see him now? Would she be angry that he was developing feelings for someone else? Or would she understand that loving Victoria didn't diminish what he'd had with her, that the heart's capacity wasn't finite, that moving forward wasn't the same as moving on? He pulled out his phone and scrolled through old photos until he found one of Sarah, laughing, caught mid-motion in their kitchen, her hair a mess and her face full of joy. He stared at it for a long time, then did something he'd been afraid to do for 2 years. "I miss you," he said out loud to the photo, to the memory, to the woman who'd shaped his life and left too soon. "I miss you every day, but I think I'm ready to be happy again. Not happy despite losing you, but happy because you taught me how. I hope that's okay. I hope wherever you are, you understand." The night offered no answer, but Ethan felt lighter somehow, like he'd been holding his breath for years and could finally exhale. The next Thursday, Ethan arrived at their usual cafe to find Victoria already there, staring at her phone with an expression of barely contained joy. "What happened?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her. "I did it. I officially stepped down as CEO this morning. Marcus is taking over day-to-day operations, and I'm transitioning to founder and chief visionary officer, which is a fancy way of saying I get to think about the future without being buried in the present." She looked up, and her eyes were bright. "I'm terrified, but also more excited than I've been in years." "That's amazing, Victoria. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you, without these past 4 months of learning how to want something beyond success, how to value life over achievement." She reached across the table and took his hand, a gesture that had become natural between them, but that now sent electricity through Ethan's entire body. "Thank you for seeing who I could be before I saw it myself. You did all the hard work. We did it together." Victoria squeezed his hand, then seemed to realize she was still holding it and pulled back, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Sorry, I'm just emotional today." "Don't apologize." Ethan's heart was racing. This was it, the moment to be brave. "Victoria, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, and something in his tone made her expression shift. "Okay. These past 4 months they've changed my life, changed me. And somewhere along the way, helping you learn how to live again helped me do the same thing. You became one of my best friends. One of the people I trust most in the world." He took a breath. "But I'd be lying if I said that was all you were to me." Victoria went very still. "Ethan, I'm falling for you," he said, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. "Maybe I have been since that first night, when you asked me how I keep choosing kindness, and I saw someone who understood loss in a way most people never will. And I know the timing is terrible. I know you just made this huge life change, and the last thing you need is complications. I know I'm still figuring out how to be okay after Sarah. But Lily asked me last night if I was brave enough to try, and I realized I am. I'm brave enough to tell you the truth, even if it changes everything." The silence that followed felt endless. Victoria stared at him, her expression unreadable, and Ethan felt his heart trying to break through his ribcage. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been in love with you for 2 months." Of all the responses Ethan had imagined, that wasn't one of them. "What?" 2 months, since that day at the museum when Lily held both our hands, and I looked at you and realized I wanted this life, this family, this man who's brave enough to be kind when the world has been cruel, who builds a home out of love instead of things, who sees me, really sees me, and doesn't run away." Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks. "But I didn't say anything because I thought you were still in love with Sarah. And you are. And that's okay. That's beautiful, actually. I would never ask you to—" "Stop," Ethan interrupted gently. "I am still in love with Sarah. I probably always will be in some way. She's Lily's mother. She shaped who I am. But that doesn't mean there's no room for you. Love isn't finite, Victoria. It expands. It makes space." "Are you sure?" "Because I don't want to be something you settle for because you're lonely. I don't want to be a replacement for what you lost. You're not a replacement. You're something entirely new." Ethan reached for her hand again, holding it firmly this time. "You're the person who makes me laugh when I thought laughter was dead. You're the one who sends ridiculous postcards to my daughter and displays her artwork in your office like it's worth millions. You're the woman who was brave enough to completely remake her life because she wanted to actually live it. That's not a replacement. That's you." Victoria was crying openly now, not bothering to wipe the tears away. "I don't know how to do this. I've never been in a relationship that was real, that mattered. What if I'm terrible at it? What if I hurt you or Lily? What if it's wonderful?" Ethan countered. "What if we figure it out together, one small choice at a time, just like we've been doing for 4 months? This is a pretty big choice." "Then let's start smaller." He smiled, his own eyes damp. "Victoria Hale, would you like to go to dinner with me? Not as friends, not as colleagues. As 2 people who care about each other and want to see where that might lead?" Victoria laughed through her tears. "That's the best offer I've had in my entire life. Yes, absolutely yes." They sat there in the cafe, holding hands across the table and crying and laughing simultaneously, while other patrons gave them curious looks. Ethan felt something click into place inside him, a piece of his future he hadn't known was missing until it arrived. "We're going to have to be careful," Victoria said eventually, practical even in the midst of emotion. "With me just stepping down from CEO, if people find out we're whatever we are, there could be talk. Accusations of impropriety." "Then we'll handle it," Ethan said. "Together, transparently. We haven't done anything wrong, Victoria. We became friends first. We helped each other through grief and loneliness and learning how to be human again. And now we're choosing to see if there could be something more. That's not scandal. That's just life." "You make it sound so simple." "The feelings are simple. The logistics might be complicated, but we'll figure it out." He paused. "Unless you're having second thoughts already?" "No," Victoria said firmly. "No second thoughts. Just terror, but the good kind. The kind that means something matters." They talked for another hour, mapping out what this might look like. They'd go slowly, be honest with each other and with Lily, navigate the professional complications with integrity and transparency. They'd protect what they were building while also being brave enough to actually build it. When they finally left the cafe, Victoria pulled Ethan into a hug right there on the sidewalk. He held her close, breathing in her perfume and the reality of her, marveling at how strange life could be. 4 months ago, she'd been an untouchable CEO he barely knew. Now she was the woman he was falling in love with, the person who made him believe in futures he'd thought were impossible. "Thank you," Victoria whispered against his shoulder, "for not leaving me alone that night, for bringing me home, for teaching me what home even means." "Thank you for being brave enough to change," Ethan whispered back, "for showing me it's possible to start over, for making me believe I deserve to be happy again." They pulled apart slowly, and Ethan saw hope in Victoria's eyes where there had once been only loneliness. He wondered if she saw the same transformation in his own face. Their first official date was the following weekend. Nothing fancy, just dinner at a quiet restaurant across town where they were unlikely to run into anyone from work. But it felt monumental anyway, this shift from friendship to something more intentional. Victoria was nervous in a way that made Ethan's heart ache. She'd changed outfits 3 times, she confessed when he picked her up, unable to decide between trying too hard and not trying hard enough. "You look perfect," he said honestly. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair down, minimal makeup. She looked like herself, and that was exactly right. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing. Their conversation had always been easy, but now there was an added layer of awareness, of possibility. Every time their hands brushed, every shared laugh felt weighted with meaning. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said over dessert, "about my expectations for this. For us." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Okay. I'm not good at relationships. I've never prioritized them, never learned how to navigate the emotional complexity, and I'm probably going to mess up, say the wrong thing or get too focused on work or retreat into old patterns when I'm scared." She met his eyes. "But I'm going to try, really try, because you and Lily, you're worth trying for." "We're going to mess up too," Ethan said. "I'm emotionally complicated. I have a daughter who comes first, always, which means sometimes you might feel secondary. I have grief that still hits me at random moments. I have days when I'm barely functional and can't explain why." He reached for her hand. "But I'm going to try too, because you're worth it." "We're quite a pair," Victoria said with a watery smile. "We really are." The hard conversation came 2 weeks later when they had to tell Lily that their relationship was changing. Ethan had agonized over how to explain it, worried about confusing her or making her think he was trying to replace her mother. But Lily, as usual, understood better than any adult would have. "So Victoria is your girlfriend now?" she asked, sitting cross-legged on the couch between them. "Yes," Ethan said carefully. "Is that okay with you?" Lily thought about this seriously. "Does this mean she'll come over more?" "Probably, yes. And we can still do museums and stuff together?" "Definitely." "And she'll keep sending me postcards?" Victoria laughed. "I'll send you even more postcards." Lily nodded, satisfied. "Then it's okay. I like Victoria. And you're happy when she's around. You laugh more." Then with devastating precision, "Mommy would like her, I can tell." Ethan felt his throat tighten. How can you tell? Because Mommy liked people who were kind and brave and made art, and Victoria is all those things. Lily leaned against Victoria's shoulder. Plus she knows all about dinosaurs now. Mommy would think that was cool. Victoria wrapped an arm around Lily, looking at Ethan over her head with wonder in her eyes. I wish I could have met your mom, she said to Lily. She sounds amazing. She was, Lily said. But she's gone. And it's okay to have new people to love. That's what Daddy taught me. In that moment, Ethan realized his daughter had learned the most important lesson he could have taught her. That love multiplies rather than divides. That making room for new people doesn't mean forgetting old ones. That life goes on, and that's not betrayal but survival. The company announcement came a month later. Victoria and Ethan sat down with HR and the board to explain their relationship, to preempt any accusations of impropriety. They laid out the timeline, how they'd met, how friendship had developed over months, how nothing romantic had occurred while Victoria was actively Ethan's direct superior. There was gossip, of course. Whispers in the break room, speculation about whether Ethan had received special treatment. But it died down quickly, partly because Victoria's transition had already been in motion before their relationship began, partly because both of them handled the situation with such transparent integrity that there was nothing scandalous to latch onto. Marcus, the new CEO, called Ethan into his office one day looking stern. Ethan braced himself for the conversation he'd been dreading. I need to talk to you about Victoria, Marcus said. I understand if there are concerns about... Marcus held up a hand. I was going to say thank you, whatever you did, whoever you were to her during her mother's death and her transition, it changed her. She's happier, more present, more human, and that's made her a better leader, a better visionary for this company. He smiled. So thank you. And for what it's worth, anyone with eyes could see you two were falling for each other at that museum with Lily. We're all just glad you finally figured it out. Life settled into a new rhythm. Victoria came over for dinner most Wednesdays, helping Lily with homework while Ethan cooked. They had date nights on Saturdays when Lily was with her grandmother. Sunday mornings, Victoria joined them for pancakes and lazy hours reading in the living room. Ethan with his mystery novels, Victoria with her art books, Lily with her increasingly complex stories about dinosaur princesses. It wasn't always easy. Victoria had moments of panic where she'd retreat into old patterns, become distant and corporate. Ethan had days when grief ambushed him and he couldn't explain why he was crying over a random song or memory. They argued about how much time was too much time together, about how to blend their lives without losing themselves, about whether it was too soon to use the word love, even though they both felt it. But they worked through it, with honesty and patience, and the understanding that relationships were built on small choices made consistently over time. 6 months into their relationship, Victoria did something that shocked everyone. She bought a house. Not a penthouse or a showplace, but an actual house in Ethan's neighborhood, 3 streets over, with a yard and a porch and room for a studio. I want roots, she explained when Ethan asked why. I want to be part of a community. I want Lily to be able to ride her bike to my house. I want to host dinner parties and know my neighbors and belong somewhere beyond my work. That's a big step, Ethan said. I'm ready for big steps. Victoria took his hand. I'm ready to build a life that's about more than just me. A life that has room for you and Lily and whoever else becomes important to me. They were taking it slow with the physical relationship, both of them navigating complicated emotions about intimacy and trust. But the night Victoria got the keys to her new house, she asked Ethan to be the first person besides her to walk through it. I want you to help me imagine what it could be, she said. You're so good at creating spaces that feel like home. I want to learn that. They walked through empty rooms as Victoria described her vision. A studio with north-facing light for painting. A guest room for when her reconnected college friends visited. A kitchen where she could learn to cook, even if she'd never be particularly good at it. A backyard where she could garden, probably kill most of the plants, but try anyway. It's perfect, Ethan said, standing in what would be her living room. It's so perfectly you. It's who I want to be, Victoria corrected. Someone who has a home, not just a place to sleep. Someone who's part of something bigger than herself. They kissed then, surrounded by possibility and empty rooms waiting to be filled with life. It was slow and sweet and felt like promise. The proposal happened a year and a half after that first night, though not in the way anyone expected. It was Lily's birthday party at the park, the one Victoria had been invited to all those months ago in a pizza restaurant. The party was chaos. 27-year-olds hopped up on sugar, a dinosaur piñata that refused to break, parents standing around making small talk while their children ran wild. Victoria was helping Lily cut the cake when Lily looked up at her with serious eyes. "Victoria, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you going to marry my daddy?" The entire party seemed to go silent, though that was probably Ethan's imagination. Every parent suddenly found something fascinating to look at that wasn't the CEO being questioned by a 7-year-old. Victoria didn't hesitate. "I'd like to. If he asked me, if you'd be okay with it." "I'd be very okay with it," Lily said, "because then you'd be my mom too. Not instead of my real mom, but like my bonus mom. And I think that would be cool." "I think that would be cool too," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. Lily turned to Ethan, who was standing frozen with a handful of paper plates. "Did you hear that, Daddy? Victoria wants to marry you, so you should probably ask her." "Now?" Ethan managed. "Well, duh. She's not going to want to marry you less tomorrow." Lily said this like it was obvious, which to her 7-year-old logic it was. Ethan looked at Victoria, who was crying and laughing simultaneously. He looked at his daughter, wise beyond her years and certain in her love. He looked at all the people watching, their friends, their community, the life they'd built together over 18 months of small choices. He got down on one knee right there in the park, still holding the paper plates. "Victoria Hale, I don't have a ring. I didn't plan this. But my daughter is right. You're not going to want to marry me less tomorrow. And I've learned that life is short and uncertain, and the right time is when you're brave enough to try." He took her hand. "Will you marry me? Will you be Lily's bonus mom and my partner and the person I build a life with? Will you keep sending postcards and displaying artwork and learning how to kill plants in your garden? Will you keep being brave enough to choose love even when it's terrifying?" Victoria pulled him up and kissed him in front of everyone, which was answer enough. But when they broke apart, she said clearly, "Yes, to all of it, yes." The crowd erupted in applause. Lily threw her arms around both of them, creating a 3-person hug that felt like family. And Ethan felt something he'd thought was lost forever after Sarah's death: complete joy. They got married 6 months later in Victoria's backyard, the one she'd slowly filled with flowers under Ethan's patient guidance. It was small, just close friends and family, Lily as the flower girl in a dress covered with dinosaurs, because that was non-negotiable. Ethan's mother-in-law came, bringing photos of Sarah to display because Victoria had insisted. "She's part of this family too," Victoria had said firmly. "She made you who you are. She gave us Lily. We honor her by including her." In his vows, Ethan thanked Victoria for teaching him that moving forward didn't mean forgetting, that opening your heart after loss was the bravest thing a person could do, that life could be rebuilt into something different but equally beautiful. In her vows, Victoria thanked Ethan for not leaving her alone that night, for seeing past the armor to the person underneath, for showing her what home meant and helping her build one. And Lily, when asked if she had anything to say, stood up and declared, "I just want everyone to know that I made this happen. I told Daddy to be brave. So basically, I'm the hero of this story." Everyone laughed, but Ethan knew she was right. Lily had been brave enough to let new people into her heart, brave enough to believe that loving Victoria didn't betray her mother's memory, brave enough to build a family that honored the past while embracing the future. 5 years later, Ethan stood in that same backyard watching Lily, now 12 and somehow even more confident, show her new baby sister Sophia the paintings Victoria had done. Victoria had continued her art, had even had a small gallery showing that sold several pieces. The money didn't matter. What mattered was creating something that brought her joy. The company had thrived under Marcus's leadership, with Victoria providing vision and strategy from her advisory role. She'd found balance, finally, between achievement and life. She served on boards, mentored young women in tech, painted on weekends, and came home every night to a family that loved her, not for what she accomplished, but for who she was. Ethan had been promoted twice, his innovative systems becoming industry standard. But his proudest achievement was the life he'd built, messy and full and rich with connection. He'd learned that survival and living were different things, that choosing joy wasn't betraying grief, that the heart's capacity was infinite if you were brave enough to keep opening it. Sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, Ethan would look at photos of Sarah and feel nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the time they'd had, for the daughter she'd given him, for the lessons she'd taught him about living fully, even when life was short. And he'd think about that December night years ago when he'd chosen not to leave a drunk CEO alone in a bathroom. How that one small choice had set everything in motion. How helping Victoria find her way back to humanity had helped him do the same. That night should have meant nothing, should have been just another company party, another forgotten interaction. Instead, it became the beginning of everything, a family, a future, a life rebuilt from grief and loneliness into something whole. Victoria found him there once, looking at Sarah's photo, and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For making room for me. For teaching Lily to make room for me. For understanding that love doesn't replace love, it just expands to hold more." Ethan turned in her arms, looking at the woman who'd become his wife, his partner, his proof that life goes on, and that's not betrayal, but survival. "Thank you for being brave enough to let me in, for choosing to live instead of just exist." "We chose it together," Victoria said, "one small choice at a time." And that, Ethan thought, was the truth of it. Life wasn't one big dramatic transformation. It was 1,000 small choices made consistently over time. The choice to be kind when the world was cruel, the choice to try when fear said to hide, the choice to open your heart even when opening it meant risking it might break again. In the living room, Lily was reading to Sophia, her voice patient as she explained the difference between various dinosaur species to a 2-year-old who mostly just wanted to eat the book. Victoria's paintings covered the walls. Photos documented their blended, chosen family. The refrigerator was still covered in artwork, now from both girls. It was messy and imperfect and nothing like the life any of them had planned. It was better. Because they'd learned the lesson that grief and joy had taught them. The moments that seem like they should mean nothing often mean everything. The choice to show up, to help, to stay when it would be easier to leave. Those choices shape lives in ways you can never predict. That December night hadn't just changed 2 lives. It had created a future none of them could have imagined, built on the simple foundation of one person refusing to let another person face their darkest moment alone. And from that single act of kindness, everything else had grown.